And if you listen to Friday's show, great show, by the way. If you didn't listen, go back and listen. Jimbo Fisher segment was fire. If you didn't listen to that show on Friday, there was about a 1-minute window where I kind of briefly paused and I said, look, there is a story going on right now at Auburn that is total message board rumor and innuendo and conjecture. And I said, on this show, I don't deal with message boards, rumors, this, that. If something concrete comes out, if something tangible comes out, then we will address it on today's Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. Well, over the weekend, something tangible came out as there is, again, absolute chaos at Auburn. There was a message board rumor, but the message board rumor, I think, was a bigger metaphor for there is a real big disconnect between Bryan Harsin and certain elements of the university, certain elements of the football program, certain elements of the players, on and on and on and on and on. And on Friday, the athletic director, Alan Green, said that he was actually planning to meet with the football players, some of the football players this weekend, to discuss Bryan Harsin, what's going on, what's working, what's not. And I think there's at least a possibility that Bryan Harsin does not survive this season, or does not survive these next couple weeks. And so with that said, let's break it down, let's get into it, and let me start by saying this. There's a lot of context and a lot of nuance in this story, and so I am going to do my best to kind of break it all down and give you all of the details, but it's going to take a minute to get you all of the details, to get you to where we are today here on Monday with Bryan Harsin's future at Auburn in jeopardy. And the details at Auburn are pretty straightforward, but they really go back a little over a year ago when Gus Malzahn was fired and Bryan Harsin was hired. And if you go back and think about that coaching cycle, I talked about it on this show, but if you go back to that coaching cycle, think about the insanity that it was. First of all, Gus Malzahn gets fired a couple days after a 5-5 regular season during COVID year. I think it was 5-5, maybe 4-4. They went 500 basically. And if you remember at the time, it was like, well, nobody's going to fire coaches during COVID. Nobody can afford the buyout. And then Auburn's like, you know what? We'll come up with the $20 million. Gus Malzahn, pack your bags, get the heck out of here. And so Gus Malzahn was really, I believe, if I remember correctly, the first really high-profile coach that was fired last coaching carousel cycle. And when that happened, it led to this wild, crazy coaching search. First, Steve Sarkisian is going to interview, then he doesn't. He obviously ultimately ends up at Texas. Brent Venables interviews, but oh, by the way, Brent Venables has been asked about that interview over the last couple weeks when he took the Oklahoma job and said, you know what, the alignment wasn't there. I felt like there was a disconnect in some places. I said I was good. Billy Napier interviewed. Now, I don't know if he was ever officially offered the job and turned it down or if he wasn't, but Billy Napier was involved. And then, of course, there was the big faction of fans that wanted Kevin Steele, the former defensive coordinator, well-respected and well-liked in that community, to get the head coaching job. And so there was that whole mess, and it ended with Bryan Harsin getting the head coaching job. And I'll be honest, I did not personally love the Bryan Harsin head coaching hire. If you remember listening to this show, I said, look, I'm sure he's a great guy, but he's coming from Boise State. He was a player at Boise State. He was an assistant coach at Boise State. He was the head coach at Boise State. He has basically spent 1 year of his career in the SEC footprint. I said at the time, I said, look, I'm not saying it can't work. I'm not saying it won't work. But there isn't a very good track record of guys that have basically spent no time in the SEC at all coming to the SEC and having success. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is Brett Bielema coming from the Big Ten, thinking he knew everything, getting his face smushed in the dirt for 3 or 4 years, and eventually getting fired. But beyond what I thought, I should say, I was eventually kind of talked out of it by people that I respect in the media. I remember Jay Boy, the guy who works for Colin Cowherd or used to work for Colin Cowherd, Jay Boy telling me, look, Harsin's good, Harsin's a culture setter, Harsin's this, Harsin's that. So there's that element of it. I didn't personally like it. I think people in the media that knew him better kind of said, you know what, give this guy a chance, he could work. But I do think it's important to note, as it pertains to the last couple weeks, this was not a universally beloved hire at Auburn either, which is where I think we get into a little bit of the mess. But to continue forward, to kind of tell you what happened, we have to go to the season and what happened during the season, and then more specifically what has happened since the season ended. First of all, season is played to Bryan Harsin's credit. Auburn actually starts off playing really, really, really well, okay? They start off playing really, really, really well. They start off 6-2, very good start to the season. Only 2 losses are at Penn State for a night game, in which, by the way, they could have won that game very easily. And then they lost to Georgia, but basically everybody got smoked by Georgia this year, so Auburn fans weren't happy about it, but they kind of understood. So you start out 6-2, everything's going well. All the things that Bryan Harsin promised, culture, accountability, toughness, physical toughness, mental toughness, all that stuff is playing out on the field. Well, then you fast forward to the next week, you go to Texas A&M, and you lose to Texas A&M 20-3, can't even move the ball. Well, it's Texas A&M, they're pretty good, or at least we thought at the time. A&M ends up finishing 8-4 overall. But then after you lose to Texas A&M, guess what happens? You lose to Mississippi State at home. And that was when it started to be like, okay, you can lose to Georgia. You can lose at Penn State. You can lose at Texas A&M. But you can't lose to Mississippi State at home. And then, oh, by the way, the next week, you lose at South Carolina. And then the week after that, you lose to Alabama in the Iron Bowl. And then after that, you lose on a Monday in December to Houston in the Birmingham Bowl. So Alabama's playing for a college football playoff national championship. Georgia's playing for a national championship in the college football playoff. Auburn's playing for the Birmingham Bowl championship on a Monday night in December. They lose to Houston. They end the season on a 5-game win streak. And if that wasn't bad enough, and that was really bad, trust me, you end the season on a 5-game losing streak with losses to Mississippi State at home, at South Carolina first-year head coach, and to Houston. If that 5-game losing streak was not bad enough, though, it gets worse from there. You know how they say on the commercials, oh, wait, there's more? Oh, wait, with Bryan Harsin, there's more. Season ends, fires Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator. Season ends, defensive coordinator Derek Mason, very well respected in the industry. I know he didn't work as a head coach at Vanderbilt, but a guy that people like, a guy that people respect. He ends up leaving Auburn as the defensive coordinator to go take the DC job at Oklahoma State. And that was the first kind of like, oh, wait a second now, Derek Mason left too? And then on top of that, this past week, Austin Davis, who was hired as the offensive coordinator out of the NFL after you fire Mike Bobo, ends up deciding that he is going to leave as well. Or maybe he says that he resigned. Who knows exactly what happened? But the bottom line is, coming off a 6-7 season with 5 straight losses to end the season, you now have to replace both coordinators because both coordinators left after the season. One of the guys you hired to replace the guy that you fired has already left, and it is now the middle of February, and you're still very much putting together your coaching staff. On top of that, but wait, there's more. On top of that, you had 20-plus players enter the transfer portal. Since the season ended, 20 players have left Auburn, many of them notable. Bo Nix, who's obviously the legacy starting quarterback, has decided to transfer. Lee Hunter, who we'll get to in a minute, a guy who was a very high-profile recruit, has decided to transfer. On and on and on down the list. Your 2022 recruiting class is not very good. You don't sign any players in the late cycle here in February. And that basically is where it gets to us on Thursday night. Where on Thursday night, that rumor came out, and I don't know if I officially said what it was, but there was a rumor that Bryan Harsin had an extramarital affair with a staffer at Auburn, a female staffer on the recruiting, on the recruiting staff, that Bryan Harsin had an affair with a recruiting staffer. And I bring that up because it is clear that everything finally came to a head on Thursday and Friday of last week. Everything finally came to a head where an offseason that started with a 5-game losing streak, then you lose 20 players to the portal. Then on top of that, you also lose both your coordinators. One leaves, one gets fired. One of the guys that you replaced to replace the other guy ends up deciding to leave as well. And you find yourself in a situation where there are message board leaks, all that good stuff, with multiple players coming out, some in favor of Bryan Harsin and some against Bryan Harsin. And as I said, it all resulted in a statement from the school president that they're separating fact from fiction, and then also with the AD meeting with the players over the weekend. So that is the context of everything that happened. That is what you need to know, how we got here on whatever it was, Friday afternoon into Friday night into Saturday. Here's what you need to know going forward, though, because this is what I think is important. I think this is what matters, and this is, to me, the more interesting part of the conversation. Who's to blame? What went right? What went wrong? And what needs to change? And by the way, is Bryan Harsin's future, is Bryan Harsin going to survive at Auburn? And so when I look at this situation, when I look at what is going on at Auburn, I think there are 2 things that can be true. And what do I say all the time? 2 things can be true in a certain situation. And I don't think there's any more crystal clear example of when two things can be true than the situation with Bryan Harsin. I think one, and I know I've talked to people about this, I don't think he's very easy to work for. I don't think he's a very nice guy. I don't think he's easy to play for either. And he probably needs to do some introspection on his interpersonal relationships, how he handles people, how he handles players, whatever. But what I also think, if you ask Bryan Harsin, and I know this as well, is that he believes that he is creating a culture of accountability, of toughness, and of ultimately winning at Auburn. And essentially that he is the modern-day Bo Schembechler. Remember the Bo Schembechler, the famous line, "Those who stay will be champions"? Well, we have all these coaches in college football that talk about culture and accountability. Bryan Harsin's trying to do it in real time, and it's clear that some people don't like it. Some people don't like the transfer numbers. Some people don't like the staff turnover. And some people somewhere, whether it's boosters, whether it's players, whether it's parents, whether it's this, whether it's that, whether it's some combination of all of them, are trying to get Bryan Harsin pushed out the door. So you ask yourself, Torres, how do you know that he is trying to build a culture of accountability, a culture of toughness? How do you know that some guys don't like it, that some guys don't? Well, it's because since all of this started over the weekend, we have had multiple players come out on both sides of the coin. There have been plenty of players who have come out in defense of Bryan Harsin, and this is a very important thing to note. Chandler Wooten, who was a captain last year, now getting ready for the NFL, said, this is via Twitter, "We didn't need a best friend, we needed a coach. That's what we had." On top of that, you had another player, Jeff Schmedling. Coach Harsin and this staff are building men of character, block out the noise, and work hard work. On top of that, I saw on Sunday morning, right as I was getting ready to record this segment of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, I saw another player come out, and I thought this was maybe the most, the most interesting of all of the statements. It came from a player named Tony Fair. And he tweeted out, this is an exact quote that he wrote on his iCloud iMessages. "Coach Harsin gave us nothing short of work, hard work. He brought a competitive edge to everything we did, and you need that in this level of ball. What head coach runs with his players while they're conditioning? Harsin did. I didn't receive the time on the field I would have liked, but that didn't take away from him being a damn good coach. He trained us to be war ready. The record we got didn't come from his coaching. It came from the cancers on the team that spread and are still spreading. This is what we dealt with this season. The only word to describe what Coach Harsin did, I won't get to the rest of it because it's references to cancer, but that is a very strong statement from a player on the team who, oh, by the way, wasn't even playing, but could see what's going on around him. And so what it appears to me is, again, what I just said. I don't think Bryan Harsin is easy to coach for if you're an assistant coach. I don't think he's easy to play for. And I'll even take it a step further. I think he's probably a little out of touch. I thought it was very interesting. Smoke Monday, a safety, a guy that was one of the best players on Auburn this past season, a guy that decided to stick around for the bowl game when he easily could have opted out, said this on Instagram Live. He said, "Since Bryan Harsin got hired, he never had one conversation with my mom or my dad. He probably don't even know their name. As a coach, how do you explain that?" And so, again, I think all of this paints a big, broad picture. I think all of this paints a picture of a guy that isn't easy to play for, isn't easy to coach with, isn't easy to coach under, and probably isn't very relatable, and probably has a lot of things to work on in his personal life and in his communication skills and all that good stuff. But what I would also say is that I can't help but think that he is trying to build a culture of accountability based on what some of those guys have said as well. Beyond that, I thought there was one final quote. By the way, I'm going quote after quote after quote after quote after quote, but I think it's important here. I saw this quote, and this one really stood out to me. This was from Lee Hunter, who started at Auburn, who decided to transfer to Central Florida this offseason to go play for his former coach. Here's what he said. "Coach Harsin has the true mindset for a winner, but has a terrible mindset as a person. The reason I chose to leave Auburn was because we got treated like we wasn't good enough and that we were like dogs." I mean, if that doesn't say it, what does? Because here's what this guy said. He has the true mindset for a winner, but he doesn't treat you very well. And so to me, that is the bullet point, big picture. And I know I'm rambling. I know I'm going in a lot of different directions. But if that doesn't tell you what's going on at Auburn, I don't know what does. I don't know what does. He doesn't treat them well, treats them like dogs. Okay, work on that, Bryan Harsin. But at the same time, the guy that left said point blank, he has the mindset of a winner. Since when we're back, and by the way, I know we talk about this. We just talked about it last week with Jim Harbaugh. We talked about the idea that in football now you have to have a coach that's more relatable, that gets it, that is more in touch with his player. I get all that. But at the same time, the player admitted himself, the guy has the mindset of a winner. Let me ask you a question. Before Nick Saban was Nick Saban, before he won all these national championships, you think he was a nice guy? You think he was easy to play for? Or do you think probably some of the players that left his program at Michigan State, left his program at LSU, maybe even left his program at Alabama when he first got there would say the same thing? Well, he doesn't treat us very well, but he's got the mindset of a winner. Wouldn't you say the same thing about Urban Meyer? When Urban Meyer took over at Bowling Green, Utah, Florida, and Ohio State, I know that players did because I know players that played for him. Not a very nice guy. Wouldn't have a beer with him. But he's going to push us to be our best. And so that, to me, is the essence of this whole Bryan Harsin thing. Don't think he's an easy guy to coach for. Don't think he's an easy guy to play for. But we now have multiple players saying, this is the coach that we needed. And then, beyond that, even the guys that are leaving are saying, yeah, he pushed us really hard. It wasn't for me, but he pushed us really hard. And so to me, that is the essence of this entire conversation. Let me take it one step further. Because to me, I think the most important quote on this Bryan Harsin thing actually came from Bryan Harsin himself. Bryan Harsin had an interview with ESPN on Friday, and here was how he ended the interview. Certainly, I'm the right man for the job. There's no doubt about it. No one is going to have a better plan than I do, but we've got to change some things. This place is not going to be a championship program until we change some things. You've got to let the head coach be the head coach and support him. And that, to me, that last sentence is the essence of what is going on here. Because I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't claim to have insight into every single thing that has happened in Auburn's football program. But what I can tell you, Auburn has probably a, 30, 40-year history of kind of meddling with things behind the scenes. No disrespect to Auburn fans, but you know it's true. Tommy Tuberville's the head coach. AD's sneaking around the side coop trying to interview Bobby Petrino. Tommy Tuberville ends up staying. They end up going undefeated in the 2008 season. He eventually gets fired. Not 2008 season, the 2004 season. He got fired in 2008. Gene Chizik wins a national championship. 2 years later, he's fired. Gus Malzahn, as I said, fired. Fired after last season when everybody said you couldn't fire people because of COVID. And so what I will say about Bryan Harsin, what I will say about the whole situation at Auburn, it reminds me of something that I said about Texas after they lost to Kansas. And if you remember this show, I did a big segment on Texas losing to Kansas. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it in the archives, whatever. But what I said was, at the time, was this. I don't know if Steve Sarkisian's the right guy for the Texas job, just like I don't know if Bryan Harsin's the right guy for the Auburn job. But at the same time, what I said was this. Don't blame Steve Sarkisian for the loss from Texas to Kansas. Don't blame the players. Don't blame the culture, because every single guy at Texas that I hear, oh, it's the culture. Oh, it's the former staff. Oh, it's the players that I inherited. Instead, blame the boosters. Blame the people behind the scenes, because every single time something goes wrong, the people with the money demand change. Every single time something goes wrong at Texas, we need a new coordinator. We need to do this. We need a new head coach. We need a new assistant coach. We need a new strength coach, whatever it is. And every single year at Texas, the reason they haven't had success since Mac Brown was there was because every single year they're changing something up. And so a kid commits to one head coach and the head coach is gone. Quarterback commits to an offensive coordinator. The offensive coordinator is gone. Defensive star commits to a defensive coordinator. The defensive coordinator is gone. And all of a sudden you look up and it's like, yeah, no wonder they never have success. It's constant chaos. It's constant turmoil. And it's the same thing at Auburn. I don't know if Bryan Harsin's the right guy. I don't know what he's going to do with his staff. I think it's probably a really bad look that he has had so much coaching turnover in 1 year. I think it's a bad look that Derek Mason left for Oklahoma State. I think it's a bad look that Austin Davis, whether it's Bryan Harsin's fault or Austin Davis' fault, that Austin Davis leaves after a month or so on the job. But at the same time, I think the essence of this entire conversation comes down to what Bryan Harsin said. And Bryan Harsin said, let the head coach be the head coach. And so I don't have answers. I don't know what's going on. Why? I know what's going on. I don't have answers. I don't know if he's the guy. I don't know if this will work. I don't know how long it will take. But give Bryan Harsin time. It's very clear that there are certain players in the program that believe in him, certain players in the program that believe he can continue to build a championship-type program. But if you decide to move on now, and again, this is assuming that the internet rumors aren't true, that he hasn't done anything malicious, that he hasn't had an extramarital affair with his subordinates, that he hasn't done this, that he hasn't done that. If it's just leaks from inside somewhere trying to get him fired, Auburn fans, you got to get out of his business, man. You got to let the guy do his job. I don't know if he's the answer at Auburn. I think he's got a lot of tough questions to ask about his staffing. I think he's got a lot of tough questions to ask about the transfer portal stuff. But what I would also say is you are not going to get this right by continually changing things over, by continually changing coaches, by continually changing coordinates, by continually changing everything every single year.